Well, hello and welcome to the AFS Technologies monthly learning series. Thank you to all for joining us today. My name is Ian Faith and I will be hosting today's session entitled Demand Planning and the TPM Tool. Before we get started, I'd like to go over how to participate in today's event. You will have the opportunity to submit questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. My colleague Stephen Rugg will collect your questions and make them available to me so we can address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. In today's webinar, Joel Cartwright, the Director of Product Development for Trade Promotion Management Retail at AFS Technologies, will be presenting the webinar on demand planning. Manufacturers are consistently looking for a way to improve demand forecast accuracy in order to optimize the manufacturing and inventory. Most manufacturers utilize some type of demand planning tool, which typically relies on historical information for the forecast. However, what if there was a large promotional event which is truly incremental from prior year? The promotional activity lies in the trade promotion management tool, and it needs to be in the demand forecast. Therefore, integration of the TPM tool to the demand tool improves forecast accuracy and provides a competitive advantage. So this begs the questions, how do I do this? And are there other manufacturers doing this? Joel, thanks very much for taking the time to join us today. I know you've got a very busy schedule.
Not a problem.
So Joel Cartwright is the Director of Product Development for Trade Promotion Management Retail at AFS Technologies. Joel has a storied history working in the CPG industry. His passion for success is exemplified in his years as a Senior Solution Engineer at AFS for Trade Promotion Management Retail. Joel's hands-on product knowledge, coupled with his ability to connect business needs with efficiencies and solutions, makes him an asset to all that he works with. He is an expert in trade promotion management and demand planning.
Very good. Thank you very much for the opportunity to meet with you this afternoon and discuss demand planning and how it relates to the TPM tool. As Ian mentioned, I've been in consumer packaged goods for quite some time with companies like Sara Lee, Sunny Delight, and Kimberly-Clark, working in capacities related to trade promotion management, sales operations, and how all those aspects or how all those areas impact the downstream components. And one of the questions we get asked a lot in our industry and our clients and opportunities is, how can I improve in some of these areas? And the first thing you want to do is identify what those areas are. And really the key impact areas that you'll find in the application, or excuse me, in utilizing the software, is an impact to the raw materials and packaging. How can I optimize the ability to better predict on what raw materials I need to require or acquire for manufacturing purposes, as well as the packaging components. Both of those are very large lines on the ledger, on the P&L for the manufacture of the product. The second big component in reference to demand planning and the key impact areas is production scheduling. Finding in the supply chain the optimization of the line, specifically if you're a manufacturer who has multiple brands and multiple flavors, line optimization is important too. So understanding what products need to be manufactured when may not sound important when you say it, but if you're head of a production line, it becomes very, very important. A lot of our clients manufacture our work in the refrigerated or frozen area. So warehousing specifically becomes a key impact area, and be able to accommodate inventory, specifically refrigerated and frozen, not having to purchase a lot of third-party warehousing for products and inventory. Load planning as well. Once I've manufactured my product, I've got to get it to my customers. So understanding how I can configure it, and what shape, size, and how much I need to plan for from a load. And as well, that coincides with the transportation scheduling, working with logistics companies to get my product to the retailer. And the final biggest component is the revenue forecast. I'm going to have to put together some sort of a flash report to my investors at the bank, and I need to make sure that when I'm forecasting that information, it's the best knowledge that I have. That way I don't look too bad at the end of the month. So how can we improve and forecast accuracy has an impact in these areas? And as I mentioned, raw materials. Without a good forecast, the negative impact is waste. and a lot of unplanned cost. So any good procurement department is going to want to understand the volume forecast to understand how much raw materials we need to be acquired, how much packaging, how much components do I have to do, and what it all leads from the volume. The second thing, as I mentioned before, poor line optimization. And one of the biggest components we've seen in manufacturing, again, is supply chain optimization. So the ability to plan correctly and not have a lot of unplanned volumes, which drives out of stock and short shipments. So very similar to product availability is another point. Costly third-party warehousing, low planned and unnegotiated freight costs. I've negotiated freight lines or lines for loads, and I've negotiated specific tactics. But if I have to go back and find a different carrier, I'm not going to get those really good rates. From a transportation scheduling, increased backhaul costs and so forth related to transportation. And revisions to financial forecasting is always a financial or accounting person's nightmare. So how can the TPM tool help here? So what we find at AFS and the customers who are utilizing our TPM tools, customers who are getting success, are those clients who allow the TPM tool to either talk to the demand tool via an integration, or at the bare minimum of a comparative between the two. And all of that starts with the forecast and customer planning. And that all starts with base volume. So if we went out and asked all of our customers, where does base volume come from? We get multiple answers, but you want to understand, is it shipment or is it scan? So where is it coming from? A lot of our clients use a combination of both. They use the consumption data base volume and translate that into shipment. Some use historical information, and they may extrapolate certain volume types such as EDLP or include EDLP in their base volumes forecast. But understanding what the base volume is. Some of our clients take the base volume directly from the demand application, as the modeling or this out of the demand tool can help determine what that base volume needs to be. Typically, that can be loaded into the TPM tool. But what we found, though, that can be disconnected, whereas the demand tool may have a different base volume than TPM. And we find that is an opportunity to align the two applications together. Understanding the incremental volume. And demand planning is going to have the incremental volume, and it's going to look to prior year. But truly understanding the incremental volume is going to come from the account managers, or the folks who are inputting those events and plans into the system. The incremental activity. Of course, their biggest task is to understanding the best way to forecast that. What's the most accurate forecast I can put in the system? So that needs to be refined. The incremental volume is always a challenge with demand planning for a new item launch. So new item incremental volume. And that coincides, of course, with retailer acceptance and what percentage of that retail acceptance is going to occur and what's the ship date. So let's talk about direct customer planning. And there's two types of customers we like to speak to at AFS, because it is our sweet spot, as it were, direct and indirect customer. But we'll start with direct customer planning. And the direct customers are the distributors that you ship, of course, directly to, the retailers that you ship directly to. The first step we have to do and like to look at is where is the base volume coming from? And as I mentioned before, it's coming from an external source, consumption data. And you want to maybe potentially, if you want to embrace this as your component, which is going to make up your base volume, of course, the first thing you're going to have to do is convert that unit to case to make that conversion meaningful in the traditional TPM tool. Understanding from the demand planning tool if it's coming from there, the model base, and what it's consisting of. If you're modeling your base is coming from the TPM tool, it's typically using the historical data and end user inputs for increase or decrease. Because what we're finding during the annual planning process is that our clients are allowing their account managers to edit or make changes to the base volume after it's been loaded from an external source. So the first task during the annual planning process is to review the base volume to say, does that make sense within the system? Are there new items or items that have fallen out, or my competitor has gotten new items in that I may be eating into my base? So you have to allow that. And that comes at the account manager adjustment. So that follows into the ability for our account managers and a tool in the TPM tool to adjust that base volume. So end users adjusting the base by retailer for lost items in distribution or other items that have been maybe put in place in my category. Same goes for and just adjusting the base by product, eliminating certain items that may have been discontinued. At the end of the day, the final step, what we've seen from a customer planning standpoint and how base forecast can impact from the demand tool from TPM, there has to be some sort of comparative to the TPM base volume forecast and the demand plan to make sure those are on the same page. Because what we're finding is that the base volume in the TPM tool is a volume that's the measure that uses to compare incremental activity. Because for customers who are utilizing our software, there's a large component of them who don't buy a large portion of the Nielsen data, yet they still want to understand what the incrementality is of the volume they ship. So they start with a solid base volume. The next component is that incremental volume, and Ian touched upon that. This is the most important factor when comparing TPM tool to the demand tool. What's incremental activity that's truly incremental to prior year? So establishing the incremental volume input tactics, and this is typically done by the account manager by event. The components are the makeup from how the incremental volume is input in the system. What we find across our customer base, it's coming from 3 different sources. The consumption data is telling our clients or customers what a lift factor is. Okay, I'm at 2 for 5 in this time period, so I'm at typically a 125 lift. Or they look at historical data and they take that is a lift factor. So the account managers are entering in a lift factor, again, based upon the base volume, which goes back to how important base volume is. They're loading potentially an incremental volume from the demand tool if they're allowing the demand tool to tell them what's truly incremental. Don't see a lot of this happen very often, but it does happen every now and again. Ultimately, though, the end user is the one who's inputting that plan volume. They're overlaying an incremental volume forecast. They're looking at historical data from prior year to understand what that incremental to input what that incremental forecast would be in order to understand what the impact is in my entire plan for this event. Because as the account manager, I have to say, okay, if I'm at $2 off a case or 2 for 5, I have to show some sort of volume lift. That's kind of the basis and the fundamentals of putting the plan together. Very similar to base volume in step 2, the account manager input is inputting an incremental volume forecast. They're using information from prior year or adjusting the incremental volume regarding the base at both a customer and a product level. The key aspect, what we find and what users find of our products, is the ability to forecast in our tools at multiple levels. Now, the catch is in step 3, the demand planning system is typically only looking at the SKU level, the production level, which is typically case level or individual unit. Depends upon how your demand planning tool is structured. So there is a bit of a mapping exercise when you're doing a comparative of the TPM tool and the demand planning tool. So what are our customers doing? Either A, they're importing the incremental volume or the total volume forecast into the demand planning model. So in step 3, this is where they're really putting the rubber to the road. They're letting the system, the TPM tool, help drive the demand planning system. Some of our customers are just doing a basic comparative. What's the TPM tool telling me? And comparing that to what the demand planning tool, because what they're trying to identify, they're using this as a litmus test, and they're trying to identify the truly incremental activity to prior year. They're trying to identify event if they see a big jump in incremental volume, you need to identify the event which is driving it. Because what our clients are typically seeing is it's one or two events. It's one or two events for a large customer like a Walmart or a Kroger that's driving that increase in demand in the TPM tool. An example would be last year at Walmart, I was not in this COMAC, or at Kroger, I'm in a more of an aggressive pricing structure. I'm at 2 for 5 or 2 for 6, which is driving me that additional lift. So what's the positive impact of all this? What's the downstream effect? So by developing specific forecast accuracy metrics, and that's typically step one, forecast accuracy metrics coming out of the TPM tool to making sure your forecast is as close to actuals as possible. It's going to impact and improve. It's going to, on the raw materials and packaging, less waste and better cost management. From a production scheduling standpoint, it's line optimization and the reduction of any variables within that production schedule. We're reducing and eliminating any need for third-party warehousing, or we're able to potentially consolidate any sort of in specific warehousing scenarios. Load optimization and reducing transportation costs and scheduling, specifically related to backhaul costs. Most importantly, is the short shipments and the out of stocks. That's just a key problem for retailers. By allowing that forecast accuracy and the production scheduling, the transportation scheduling, I can help reduce short shipments and out of stocks. Most importantly, for the accounting and financial folks, improved financial forecasting. And this really has two components to it. The overall forecasting of how well my organization is going to do, but specifically to a trade budget, to the P&L that the trade accrual resides on. A lot of our clients look at trade accrual, and I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent, but it is impacting here to get a full understanding of the revenue impact. A lot of our clients, by improving the forecast accuracy in the TPM tool, they're able to improve how they accrue for the trade dollars. And what I mean by that is customers, when they have improved forecast accuracy and understand how trade works in more detail, they're able to book a live accrual based upon either A, what the spending is going to be. Of course, spending in the system is driven by forecast and volume. So they're able to book a spending forecast, or based upon a live accrual rate, what they think they're going to ship. So instead of arbitrarily booking in an accrual based upon a percentage or what I did last year, I can improve my forecast accrual on my P&L. And then in turn, instead of dropping those accrual dollars to the bottom line when it's positive, I can take that money and drive revenue somewhere else. So there is an improvement in the accrual capacity as related to revenue. So that's a lot said in a few minutes. So typically people, when I go through this, they're asking me, all right, where do I go from here? What's my next step? Well, the next step, all this typically starts during the annual planning process. It's difficult to change up a process in the middle of the year. More often times than not, or more importantly, the auditors may not let you do that. But you typically want to review this during the annual planning process. Okay, how I'm going to have the TPM tool help with my demand forecast. So this all starts in the annual planning process. This year, we're going to do more of a comparative of TPM to the demand tool. The second component of that is let's review the demand planning applications. And let's see what it's looking at as compared to what, say, the TPM tool is looking at. What's the modeling capability? How is it arriving? Let's make it less of a black box and more upfront, so we can make sure that everyone is on the same page and understanding what the demand tool application is driving, and compare that to and see if there are any gaps in the TPM tool. The second big component, and I hear this a lot with our clients as well as opportunities, I struggle with understanding what base volume is. So when customers come to me and ask us, or clients or opportunities, and say, what's the best way for you how does your system, or how do you derive a base? So, well, unless you're going to spend a tremendous amount of money on optimization and modeling, the best thing you can do at base is look at your historical information. Define what your base volume is going to be, communicate that to the rest of the organization, and get everyone looking at base the same way. So you're able to articulate, okay, this is our base volume. This is what you're going to use to analyze. And the same goes on the demand planning tool. Make sure that that tool is deriving base volume the same way as the TPM tool, making sure those are both aligning. The next big component is develop or sharpen your forecast accuracy metrics, either within the TPM tool or as a dashboard, something that the entire organization is looking at the account managers for to improve forecast accuracy. And it's a very simple metric. You want to come down to the point is, I want my forecast accuracy to be within plus or minus 4% of my actuals, 3%. Stage it as a target year over year. Okay, year one on this practice, we're going to be 5%. But our goal for the end of the year is to be at a plus or minus 4%, plus or minus 3%. And that will drive not only, again, your volume forecast, which in turn drives those impact areas downstream, but again, from a financial standpoint and from an accrual. The key takeaway on this is we develop and sharpen the forecast accuracy metrics, but display them. Make sure everyone sees how well your account managers are doing or how well or where they can improve. The biggest thing I see and where you can go from here is develop or increase your plan review sessions. Now, more oftentimes than not, a lot of times I talk to our clients or opportunities. They ask me, how often does the senior management review the plan in most businesses? Historically, in my experiences, plan review sessions are occurring at least once a month. They're doing course corrections. They're looking at gaps and risks to plan. Most importantly, they're looking at those forecast accuracy metrics. But reviewing the plan, call out opportunities, call out where there are gaps to deliver it either against the objective or where there are risks or gaps to the demand forecast as it looks in the demand planning system. So not only looking at the plan as compared to the objectives, take it the next step to look at it, how is it compared to what the demand component is saying? Finally, develop a success metric overall. I talked about in the fourth bullet point a forecast accuracy metric, but need to develop an overall success metric for all aspects of the impact areas I talked about. Is it improvement to contribution? Is it improvement to margin? And hold the individual account managers who are driving the forecast, or at least make them aware of, this is the success metric that we're going to see an improvement to comparing the TPM tool to the demand planning metric. We're going to say that's an increase in margin or an increase in contribution to bottom line growth within the application. Visibly putting that in front of the account managers, visibly putting that in front of the organization, not overwhelming it with a lot of numbers, but showing a progression of improvement. So a success metric that the organization can look to and say, look how good we're getting comparing the TPM tool to demand. And it shows because it's trickling downstream, hitting all those areas of the supply chain and the accounting process overall. It's proving us to be a better company overall, and it's all driven by just utilizing the TPM tool into demand. So that's a lot to talk about over the last several minutes and so forth, but it is important to encompass these two areas. We talked a bit about the direct and indirect capabilities, and demand, of course, is important for the indirect forecast as well because those are driving what the distributors are pulling. It's also specifically we're seeing for customers, this is becoming more and more important for customers who are in the natural specialty channel, who have have a lot of product short shelf life. That's a mouthful to say. So it's important to align these as best we can. So right now, I will turn it back over to Ian, and we'll see if we have any questions.
Joel, thank you so much for that. It's always great to hear how eloquent and succinct you are talking about TPM. Yeah, we do have a couple of questions, actually. The first one would be, are there any recommendations for comparing the TPM tool versus the demand planning tool when the forecasts are generated at different levels, national account versus warehouse or site?
What I typically do, the recommendation was to sort the volume try to get it down to a planned customer level, and then sort it by customer size. So what I mean by that is if there are different levels, typically the demand planning tool is only doing a forecast, maybe say at a banner ship to level. But the TPM tool is, only looking at a planned customer, and we'll take Kroger, for example. But the best way to start from a sophistication standpoint is try to find, or you'll know who your bigger customers are, and then can find those who they will be, and then be able to roll up and compare that to the demand planning tool. So identify who your big customers are, the Walmarts or the Kroger, because typically those are the two types of customers that are really going to move the needle from a demand standpoint. The first two biggest customers, and then sort from their size down. Make sense?
Yep. Let's have a look. Yes, there is another one, which is, can you describe some of the challenges that trade promotions create for your demand planning?
The biggest challenge is what you actually just mentioned, is because you plan at multiple levels and the demand planning tool doesn't capture that. The biggest challenge is understanding where tactics which aren't pricing driven are driving demand. What I mean by that is it's a lot easier to understand when you do a pricing condition type of rebate and event. So when I'm at 2 for $5, where I'm a temporary pricing reduction, it's a little easier to identify the volume that's going to drive from that. Where it becomes a challenge is overlaying an ad, a feature and display, what that will drive, or what additional volumes that will drive. It becomes more and more complex when you're overlaying that with a pricing condition. So those are the biggest obstacles to overcome. And typically how you can overcome that is the consistency of year-over-year planning. Compare back to times and events where you had that type of combination of event tactic, feature, display, ad, TPR, and see what the outcome of that volume was. But that's typically the biggest challenge. And typically what we find is customers not on our TPM tools, they have the biggest challenge with, because other applications don't give them that capability.
Right. Fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually have quite a few questions now coming in. Any comments on base lift model versus the totals model?
The base lift models you have to take them with a grain of salt. It just depends really on your category. I tend to look at more from a total standpoint, but the base and lift models, because it's kind of a black box as far as the information you're getting out of. And again, I'm back to how are they deriving base. So I'm a little questionable on the two. So I tend to look at it as from a total. Does that help?
Yep. And if you have time for one more,
Sure.
How has your company quantified the potential ROI of improving the accuracy of your demand planning?
How they look at it, they start with either twofold. They start with a contribution number that they want to hit. And they say, okay, if we improve the forecast accuracy, we should see at least A, a percentage increase in our margin, or B, a contribution increase to the bottom line. And using that as a starting point and then work backwards and how that can impact. So I say, okay, I need to save $200,000 or drive contribution up $200,000. Forecast accuracy in the TPM tool and relates to the demand tool, I need to do what? Well, I need to improve this incremental activity. But start with a number that's achievable, either from a contribution standpoint or a margin percentage, and work backwards into developing the metrics that will drive that number. You're probably going to struggle with that the first few times you look at it, because a lot of the companies that we see don't fully understand how it could flow downhill, because they may not be as communicating with as much with the supply chain folks. So start with a number and work backwards.
Beautiful, Joel. It's always a pleasure. And for everyone, thank you. That concludes our questions from the audience. And as you can see from the slide on the screen, please feel free to follow up with Joel Cartwright at your convenience. And if you need to, request a demo of the AFS TPM tool. On behalf of AFS Technologies, we want to thank you for taking the time today to participate in today's webinar. As a reminder, all participants will receive an email in the next few days with a link to today's presentation in a download. Other complementary resources are available at AFS on our website at afsi.com. There's also our TPM LinkedIn group that we'd love you to join, and again, there's a link in the presentation to that. Again, thank you to everyone for joining us today. Joel, especially you, thank you very much. It was a fantastic presentation. So until next time, enjoy the rest of the week, everyone, and goodbye for now.